Today's web users may be coming to your site from their PC at work. They might be coming to it from their laptop. But chances are they're probably going to be doing something either by phone or by tablet or by some other device that didn't exist just a few years ago that enables them to be able to look at the application in the sites in brand new ways that we didn't really understand before. And the challenge has been, how do I provide a great viewing experience for all these different devices? And as the browser compliance has come together with standard rendering for HTML, we still have size differences. Responsive design refers to handling different size devices in portraits and resolutions and giving us some feedback in how the HTML responds. And using cascading style sheets or CSS and JavaScript, responsive design, an application that works with this, is going to recognize when we're on a different size device and respond accordingly. And it does this by using what's known as a media query. What a media query does is it is some meta tags that HTML uses to return back what type of resolution I'm looking at on a given device. We're going to take a look at how this works inside of ASP.NET and what we can do with it. We'll look at a specific technology called Bootstrap and where that fits. But when you think about how do you handle mobile, how do you handle that application, you're really working with something that needs to know what is it I'm looking at, what does the device look like. Media queries are the meta tag that goes out and looks for something called the viewport and then queries the device to return back information about it. So I might get back, for instance, the width of the device and be able to add that to some conditional CSS that will respond accordingly. So for instance, I might have something that says, okay, if I'm using media for a handheld, I can then include this mobile CSS. Inside the mobile CSS, I might have a media style query that's going to say only show the screen and the max width is 1024, then go out and then set the minimum width of the article to be 320 pixels. So at the very low level, we go out and we create the media query, and then we handle some conditional style sheets to respond to that device. Bootstrap is a technology, it's a framework for working with style sheets in JavaScript that has evolved from what was originally called Twitter Bootstrap and is now included in the .NET templates and applications. And so working with Bootstrap is a very easy way to go out and handle adaptive rendering. And as a framework, it makes it easy to go out and leverage the template to build some interesting responsive behaviors. The new templates have it installed, and once it's there, you can download additional themes and look and feel. Some of them are free, some of them are for pay, and you can get them from Bootswatch. You can go out to Wrap Bootstrap. You can also just do some searches to find information about it. But what happens is that you end up with some style tags that you can use inside of your markup. You can size content with CSS tags. So for instance, you can use the grid sizing of saying that a given set of data is going to be so many columns wide, and you've got a grid layout that says, okay, how many or how wide do I want this particular block of content to be? I might have a 3-column layout when I'm in full page mode, but I only want 1 column when I'm down to into a mobile browser. Working with images and trying to get images to respond to the correct size. There's some tags that we can use. For instance, the image responsive tag on an image will cause the image to react accordingly and then render itself to the size that we need without increasing the payload, so it makes it more efficient. Same thing with tables and other tags. There's a lot of options for how we can go out and work with Bootstrap to make it easy to go out and design our sites. There are also a number of great controls, Ajax-style controls, that are available in Bootstrap that make it easy to do things like working with modals, dialogues, things that pop up, working with drop-down lists, or maybe a tooltip or a watermark on a field that makes it easier to build responsive and good-looking user interface. Let's take a look at how we can work with responsive development in our application. So to work with a simple example of how we can do responsive design, I'm going to go out and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to add just a new ASP.NET project. I'm going to do just a empty web. And using the empty web template, we'll end up with something that has no authentication and nothing in there, just an empty web. And if I take a look at the pages here, I've got my web config. I'm targeting the 4.5 framework, and I'm going to go into some starter code that I've got. And let me pull this here. And I'm just going to drag into my empty web what has been a traditional CSS style application where I've got a page, I've got something that's got a master page that's going to lay things out, I've got a couple of menus. The neat thing about style sheets and working with CSS is that can change the rendering and the look and feel of things just by including some CSS. So for instance, if I drag on the ABC, it'll give me a certain kind of a look and feel. If I drag on other types of links on here, I can get just a completely different feel. So like for instance, day-of.net, or maybe I want to do the heroes happen here. Or I can just go out and update it. Now it's a Benko site. The style sheets are very powerful for how we lay out and work with content inside of an application. But if I run this and I say view this in the browser, what you're going to find is that when I go to small, is that it's just not doing a good job of rendering and being reactive to the kinds of things that I would want to do inside of my application. So what we do is we look at how we can add the media query to respond to specific things when we're going out and doing some browsing. So let me take this, and I'm going to add another example I've got. And this is where I've got my mobile folder. I'm just going to add that here. And inside of this, what I've got is I've got a default HTML page, which has got just a simple layout for a to-do list. If I right-click and I say view this in the browser, you'll see that it now has the page. And without the design, it's kind of moving stuff around a little bit, but it's just a standard layout. It's not looking real pretty. Everything just kind of gets smushed together. You'll see that the border here is laying outside of where I want it to go. I really want to add something to make this a lot more responsive. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a viewport or media query to do this. So the first thing is to add that the meta tag. And you'll notice that one of the meta tags that's in Visual Studios is meta viewport. Double click on that snippet and tab, and it adds the viewport with the content for the device width. Now I can come down, I can say, okay, well, if I have this, then I've got a mobile style sheet that I might want to include that is going to say, okay, well, collapse the headshot if I get down to something, and also set the minimum width for the article to be 320 pixels. So in my default HTML, I'm going to add these media queries to conditionally look for if the media is a handheld device or if it's screen and the maximum width is less than 500 pixels, then I'm going to go out and I'm going to include the mobile CSS, which then will cause this rendering to look different. So let's go ahead and let's take this and right-click and say view it in the browser. And now what I can do is I can come over here, and as I make it smaller, you'll see that the picture just disappears without rolling under. And also when I get to the edge, you'll notice that now instead of wrapping and getting smaller, it's going to stop and say, okay, well, that's as small as I can get. So that's a very basic example of how a media query works. A much more involved and better done example of this is in the templates that are included with the default page. So in our example of our ASP demo where we did web forms, we'll notice that we have something up here called content, and in here is a style sheet called bootstrap.css. Bootstrap CSS, if I take a look at it, is actually a fairly large file. It's got lots and lots of information in here for CSS that makes it easy for us to go out and create a very rich environment. So if I take the default page here and I go out and view this in the browser, If I'm running full screen, you'll see that I've got the menus at the top. I've got the layout of items here. If I make this a little bit smaller and go a little bit larger, depending on how wide I am and how tall, you're going to see that as I get to a thinner screen that things are going to happen. Notice that right here is a hit point where, or set point, where the width of the content gets smaller. Notice it gets smaller, and instead of being 3 columns on the bottom, it's 1 column, and each column is now stacked. As I get smaller still, you'll notice that the menus are going to start collapsing. So if I get to this, now you'll notice that the menus are now little buttons on the top, which are going to show a different style of rendering. And if I bring this in even more, I'll get to the point where the actual content, the form, the actual size gets smaller. Now, this style of a application would look great on a phone because it's going to have the rendering laid out so that it's responding to the size of the device. And it's real touch friendly, so I've got the buttons and the menus. But how do I actually interact and work with this? Well, one thing is that I've got this layout at the start that has got some content down here. If I take a look at my default page itself, and let's switch over to the source, you're going to see that I've got these different classes attached to them. So for instance, I have this div here called colMD4, which is a column size for this particular div. So each of the columns are now going to fit into a grid that is going to add up to 12. So I've got 4 columns, I've got 3 columns, and I've got the size of 4 on each of these. If I want to change this, I can change the numbers so that something is larger or smaller. So I might have the first column being a little bit thinner, maybe 2, and have the last column also at a 2, and then set the middle column to be 8. And if I do this, and I say view it in the browser, now I'll notice that the getting started is very thin, web hosting is very thin, but the middle column is going to be much larger. And back over here. And so you can see that when it goes in and does the drop down, it now has a way of being able to customize the size and the width of these columns. I can also use other tags and other types of things. So for instance, if I've got let me go ahead and grab a picture, for instance. And here I've got let me add some content here. Suppose I'm working with an image, and let me go out and add the image to our project, just throw it in the content folder. And suppose I've got an image sitting on the page and I just want to have it sitting outside of the divs at the bottom of the page. Or actually, let's take this and just put this inside of the first column. So right here. If I go out and I right click and say view it in the browser, now in my first column I'll have that nice image, a picture that I want to include. And you'll notice that it's going to go out and it'll render, but the image is a little bit large and doesn't really fit where I want it to be. So what I can do is I can take this image and I can add some tags to it. So I can say class is equal to image responsive. And now if I go out and I say view this in the browser, now it's going to add that image, but it's going to be in a smaller size. Let's add this to the middle column. So let's do the Alt key and press the up and down arrow to move it around. So here I've got the image coming right after the H1 or the H2 for the size in the middle column. And let's take this and say view it in the browser. And now it's going to fit inside the column and it'll size it accordingly. So it's interesting when I go to a smaller size that the image will also step down in size to fit the area where it's currently placed. So if I right click on the properties of the picture here, kind of interesting is that it knows that this current width is only 290 pixels. So it's actually rendering the picture and sending it down to the page. So the content is fitting efficiently in what's in the page to render out accordingly. So I'm not sending down a 3 meg picture. It'll actually render it the way that you would expect it to. Another thing that we can do is we can work with table data. So let's make this, say, 4, and make this 6. And suppose we have a table that we want to include inside of this as well. So here's a simple table that's got some data, what's new for some different courses that are going on. If I view this in the browser, you'll see the standard table is kind of just doesn't really have anything that's that interesting. The Bootstrap allows us to change the look and the feel of this by simply going out and adding a tag on the table using the style sheet. So I can say class is equal to table, and I can say table striped, table hover, table bordered. And let's save it. And if I click on the browser link, by the way, the browser link allows me to actually update the page without refreshing it. So if I click on the browser link, it's going to go ahead and just tap to that browser and update it. But now you'll see I've got the response for the table using some real nice look and feel. Now, I said you could use Bootstrap to change the entire look and feel of this site. Right now it's got the standard out-of-the-box look with the white and the black. I might have a different look that I'm interested in. So if I take a look at that Bootstrap CSS, this file, I can replace the contents of it with a theme that I want to use. So for instance, if I go out to Bootstrap, go to wrapbootstrap.com, there's a number of different themes and templates, so you can go out and you can say, okay, well, here's the different themes I can download, and I can say, okay, I might want to buy this one or that one. There are also some free ones I can use, and that is Bootswatch. And Bootswatch is a set of free themes that I can use for Twitter Bootstrap that are available to download. Being that I like free, I'm going to come down, I'm going to pick one to say, okay, let's use this. So for instance, if I like the Shamrock, maybe it's getting close to whatever, I can go out and I can say, okay, well, download that. I can say select all and copy, and then I can come back over to our page, select all, and paste in, and then do a Control-K-D to format the entire thing. And now I've got the Shamrock look and feel. And if I go out to my application and run it, and we refresh the page and reload the theme, you'll see that now we've got the nice shamrocky kind of a look and feel. So it's a very easy way to go out and work with themes and get a completely different look and feel. And you can pick and choose the type of thing that makes sense. One of the other things is you've got the menus on the top, and if I add other menus, I could have that showing up as well. So Bootstrap makes it easy to go out and work with a responsive framework to build application sites that are going to respond to whatever kind of device we're on. But they all are based on top of using that basic media query that goes out and says, okay, well, what does that viewport look like? And then conditionally we'll do different types of processing based on what we're looking at.